do you think it's something worth really putting as the first priority for any government now?
The first priority of any government should be the safety and prosperity of its people. And it's because safety and prosperity comes first that climate change is of interest. Um, but when it comes to what we actually do, the big questions are all about how. So there's no doubt that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas and that it contributes to climate change and that our emissions have made a contribution. The big questions are how big a contribution and how much difference will our policy action make and at what
Yeah.
cost that policy action comes. So I checked the figures recently. In the years for which the figures are available, the latest years for which there are figures, the UK's total annual emissions, our total emissions, were less than China's annual increase. So if we completely eliminated the UK's emissions, China would more than make up for it in the subsequent year. And so it's just there's just no point us eliminating our own prosperity and shutting down our industries through high energy prices when China's going to more than make up for any reduction we have. Now we have reduced emissions. I'm not suggesting we go back to coal. What we should do is be realistic and have gas to nuclear because gas is relative to coal. It's carbon efficient. And what we do need is always on cheap and reliable power. And the best way to get that is gas to nuclear. And I don't mind renewables being used as long as they compete freely without subsidy. And that, of course, they can't cope with. But we end up paying them when it's too windy and paying them when it's not windy enough and paying them a higher price than they should otherwise receive. People lie about the cost of wind. They talk about wind's incremental cost, once the turbine's up, completely forgetting about the capital cost of the wind turbine. And a lot of nonsense, I'm afraid, is talked, and people should be held to account for it to a much greater degree. I think the reason that they're not is because people have been quite wrongly persuaded by the incorrect use of high emissions scenarios, that is, scenarios which suggest we'll have very, very high levels of carbon dioxide, levels which are now implausible, because we'd have to go back to have a massive return to coal to get there, and we won't. But unfortunately, politicians, including Boris, have been misled with the use of these high emissions scenarios. And so, of course, they think that we're all doomed and panic, and it's not true. So, yeah, we should do something about it, but we should do sensible things we can afford, which don't absolutely cripple our prosperity.
The data shows that the goals that are currently set to European countries as well as Western countries mostly is that we can't achieve the numbers we are planning to achieve by 2030. It's just impossible. We're there, I think, at 18% or something like that,
Hmm.
and there is just no way of getting there. But a lot of economies suffered. For example, like Germany. Germany economy, when they tried to transition so fast that their economy said, no, you can't do that.
Well, you see,
And that's
we've
where
done
I think we have to find balance. And I think we should just sit and think rather than be emotional about this issue.
well. If only people would sit and think. Look, we're all only human. We're all driven by emotion and instinct as well as reason. But this conversation in particular has escaped all reason. And one of the things I've learned from my career as an airworthiness engineer in the armed forces, and indeed from skydiving, is that when your life's really on the line, it's time to think really hard and really quickly. It's you don't want to, but particularly skydiving's a very acute example because if when you jump out of the aeroplane, you need your equipment to work, and sometimes you might have
Mm.
a malfunction. And what you don't do is panic. You think really carefully, you're well prepared, and you do the right thing at the right time. But what's happened with climate change is that people have seen a risk, and there is a risk, but then they've panicked, and we've ended up doing stupid things. And those stupid things ruin us. So, for example, we've ended up driving our industry offshore to China. And the answer to that is now considered to be to introduce what's called a carbon border adjustment mechanism so that we put tariffs on things when they've been made overseas, when they come back to account for the overseas carbon emissions. And the stupidity of this overall policy is amazing. We've driven our production to China, and then we're going to add extra costs on ourselves by implementing tariffs when the goods come back to us. It's you really you couldn't make it up. But we're just making up. I mean, it is another outworking of a kind of socialism, which is state planning. State planners have come up with a succession of stupid policies which have driven the means of production to China, a communist country that's embraced some private property rights and free exchange, but not political liberalism. And now they have the means of production. We're going to tax ourselves heavily as we buy from them, and it's a road to absolute not only ruin but subordination and future misery. Terrible.